Ever feel like the world is like drowning in data? Like we're generating it faster than we can even say the word algorithm.
It's true. The sheer volume of information being created these days is, well, it's mind-boggling.
That's why we're diving headfirst into the world of big data today. We're using these excerpts from The Rise of Big Data, how it's changing the way we think about the world.
By Kenneth Cukier and Viktor Mayer-Schoenberger. It's a fascinating look at how this data explosion is changing, well, everything.
Ready to have your mind stretched. Maybe even a little datafied, as they put it.
Datafied is an interesting word choice, and it's pretty spot on when you consider the sheer scale of information we're talking about.
Okay, so like, how much data are we talking about exactly? Give me a sense of the scope.
All right, imagine the Library of Alexandria, that legendary treasure trove of ancient knowledge.
Yeah, I get it. Huge library. Go on.
Now picture that amount of information dot times 320 to every single person on Earth.
Wait, seriously? That's more data than I can even fathom.
That's the reality of big data. It's not just a bigger haystack, it's an entirely different landscape of information.
Okay, I'm starting to see why they call it big data, but it's not just about the amount, right? It's about how we approach it.
Exactly. Big data represents a fundamental shift in how we think about information. It's about moving away from our traditional reliance on small, perfect samples of data. We're talking about analyzing everything, embracing the messiness.
So instead of a carefully curated library, we're talking about something more like the entire internet, including all the cat videos and questionable grammar.
Exactly. And as strange as it sounds, that shift to embracing the messy has actually led to some significant breakthroughs.
Really? Like what?
Take Google Translate, for example. It used to rely on a smaller set of meticulously crafted, rule-based translations.
Yeah, I remember those days. Translations weren't always the best.
Right. But then they completely changed their approach. They started feeding the system billions of pages of real-world text websites, articles, even informal conversations.
Wait, so they essentially let Google Translate loose on the internet to learn from whatever it could find?
Pretty much. And it's amazing. The results were remarkable. By analyzing this massive, messy data set, Google Translate was able to identify these subtle patterns and nuances in language, things that a rule-based approach could never have captured.
So more data, even if it's messy, actually led to better translations. That's counterintuitive.
It is, and it highlights a key principle of big data. Sometimes the more data you have, the less you need to worry about having perfectly clean or accurate data.
So it's not just about having more data, it's about having the right kind of data, even if it means getting a little messy in the process.
Exactly. And that leads us to another major shift that Cukier and Mayer-Schoenberger highlight, the move from causation to correlation.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit. What exactly do we mean by causation versus correlation in the context of big data?
In the past, we've always tried to understand why things happen, the cause and effect relationship. But with big data, sometimes the more valuable insight is simply knowing what is happening, even if we don't fully understand why.
So it's less about finding the root cause and more about identifying patterns and making predictions based on those patterns. And this idea of correlation over causation, it's like the whole idea behind Google flu trends, right? They figured out a way to track flu outbreaks just by looking at what people were searching for online.
Exactly. You see, before Google flu trends, public health officials, they mostly relied on these reports from doctors and labs, which, could take weeks to compile.
Yeah, and by the time they had a clear picture of the outbreak, it was often too late to be proactive.
Exactly. But Google, they realized they could maybe get ahead of the curve, tap into this collective wisdom of the internet.
So instead of waiting for people to get sick, go to the doctor, they were looking at what people were searching online as like an early warning system. That's wild.
Right. They were able to find these search terms that were really strongly correlated with flu activity, things like flu symptoms, cough medicine, even just thermometer.
Okay, so by tracking how many people were searching those terms, they could predict where these outbreaks were going to happen before they even showed up in doctors' offices.
That's the power of big data, right? It's not about knowing why someone searched headache, but what that search might tell us about, the bigger picture.
That's incredible. It's like using the internet's collective sniffles to track a virus.
Mm.
But okay, let's shift gears for a second. You mentioned earlier that big data is about analyzing everything. And that makes me think of datafication, which Cukier and Mayer-Schoenberger talk about. What is that and why is it so important?
So datafication, it's basically this process of turning, well, almost anything and everything into data that computers can analyze. It's the idea that even the most everyday stuff, like how we get to work, what we eat, it can all be measured, analyzed.
So not just digital info like emails and social media, but turning actual real-world stuff into data points.
Exactly. Think about those fitness trackers, smart speakers, constantly collecting data, right? Your steps, your sleep, even like what you're talking about in your own living room.
And then that data is used to like personalize stuff, make things better, target us with ads, all that.
Right.
Okay, so datafication is already happening everywhere. But Cukier and Mayer-Schoenberger, they go even further, right? They talk about datafying stuff we wouldn't even think of as data, like our emotions, our personalities even.
Absolutely. They actually have this great example, a Japanese professor, he's working on a car theft prevention system. And get this, it's based on butt prints.
Hold on. Butt prints. Like fingerprints, but for your,
Yeah, he got
you're
out.
kidding.
Nope. The idea is how you sit in a car, the way your weight is distributed, it's actually unique to you.
So my behind has a signature that could prevent car theft.
Yeah.
Okay. That's both hilarious and amazing.
It is, and it really highlights how with big data, pretty much anything can be a data point. Even something as, seemingly random as how you sit down.
Okay, I'm seeing how datafication is powerful, but also kind of creepy, right?
Yeah.
Where's the line between using data to improve our lives and like becoming a surveillance state? I mean, it's a little unnerving, right? Like how much data is being collected about us without us even realizing it.
Right, and that's exactly the kind of conversation Cukier and Mayer-Schoenberger want us to be having. They're not saying big data is inherently bad.
Right.
It's more that we need to be really careful about how we use it. Like any powerful tool can be used for good or for bad.
So it's not really about the technology itself, but more about the ethics behind it.
Exactly. We have to think about data privacy, data security, and then there's the potential for bias in the algorithms themselves.
Yeah.
Making sure they're not perpetuating existing inequalities.
It's a lot to unpack, but it sounds like we need to be having these conversations now before it's too late.
Absolutely. The time to be thinking about the ethical implications of big data is now, while it's still relatively early days.
Okay, so we've talked about some of the challenges and potential downsides, but let's flip the script for a second. What are some of the ways big data can be a force for good in the world?
Well, one area where it has huge potential is healthcare. We're already seeing it with personalized medicine, using genetic data to tailor treatments. But imagine a world where we could use big data to predict and prevent disease outbreaks or even develop new cures for currently incurable illnesses.
It sounds kind of like science fiction. But I guess with big data, anything is possible.
Exactly. And it's not just healthcare. Big data can also be used to address some of the world's most pressing social and environmental challenges, like climate change.
Okay, now that's something I want to hear more about.
Right.
How can big data help us tackle something as complex as climate change?
Well, for starters, we can use it to create these incredibly detailed models of the Earth's climate. And these models can help us to predict and prepare for the effects of climate change with much greater accuracy.
That makes sense.
We can also use big data to optimize energy consumption, develop new renewable energy sources, basically reduce our carbon footprint in all sorts of ways.
So we can use big data to both understand the problem and develop solutions.
Exactly. And not just that, but we can also track our progress over time and make adjustments as needed, which is crucial because climate change is such a complex global challenge. It requires this kind of coordinated response.
And big data can help us achieve that by giving us the information we need to actually make those informed decisions.
Exactly.
It's like big data is this powerful lens that lets us see the world in a whole new way, revealing patterns and connections that we never would have noticed before.
That's a great way to put it. And as we continue to gather more and more data and develop even more sophisticated tools to analyze it, that lens is only going to become more powerful.
It's both exciting and a little bit daunting at the same time.
Oh.
But this has been an incredible deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much about big data and its potential to impact, well, everything.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
So as we wrap up, what's the one big takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with?
I think the most important thing to remember is that big data is not some abstract force that's beyond our control. It's a tool that we've created, and it's up to us to decide how we want to use it. So let's be thoughtful about the ethical implications and make sure we're using it for good.
Well said. To our listeners, keep learning about big data and what it means for the future. Because as with any powerful tool, understanding both the promises and the perils is key. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of big data.